This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the X-Cast, The Truth is in Here. I'm your host, Sarah Blair, and you're listening to I Want to Believe Minute, where we examine the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, we're exploring minute 51, running from approximately 50 minutes on the dot as Scully is injecting the syringe in the operating room through to 50 minutes 59 seconds as Scully and Mulder are talking. Joining me today is regular X-Cast guest and first-timer on I Want to Believe Minute, JJ Lendl. Hey, JJ.
Hi, Sarah. Hello, everyone who can't answer me. Hello, everyone in the future. I love podcasts because it's like you're communicating with the future.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So, I mean, think about all the things we don't know right now.
Amazing.
That the people listening know.
Mm-hmm.
They could just send us information back through the podcast stream about the stock market and, stem cell research, things that are going to be really important in this minute of I Want to Believe.
Exactly. Yes. Well, before we get started on that, I would like to drop a quick reminder to follow the X-Cast on social media. You can find us in all the places at linktree/the-Xcast. And if you're enjoying the show, please drop us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. This not only does us a favor, but it helps other X-Files fans find our show and enjoy it too. Also, don't forget that you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/thexcast for early releases of episodes, lots of bonus content, and more.
Cool. And just to be clear, it should be a positive rating that they give.
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right.
If you enjoy it,
yeah.
If you're not enjoying it, just move on with your life.
You can just step back and walk away. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
We don't need the negativity in our lives. That's
Nobody
cool.
needs that kind of negativity.
No.
Especially not on the internet.
Positive vibes only.
Right. Historically positive place, the internet.
Yeah. Reviews are important though. They help people find stuff because
absolutely
it's noticed. And if you have friends who are X-Files fans, you want them to enjoy things that you enjoy, right? So
right, absolutely. And we're living in the algorithms world here, so we need to.
It's true.
Feed the algorithm a little bit.
For sure. All right, JJ. Let's talk a little bit since this is your first time on I Want to Believe Minute.
It is.
We have some things to talk about, so this is going to be fun.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your experience when you first saw I Want to Believe.
Well,
where were you? What was happening?
I was in a movie theater. I remember that. So this was summer of 2008, and I was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time, and I caught a viewing. I didn't catch a midnight viewing, but I caught an early matinee on the day that it came out. And I took a friend who was not a huge X-File, but loved to see movies. And I remember that the theater was quite empty when I got there. And as I recall, this was either the same week or maybe the week after or before The Dark Knight came out.
Yes.
And so, I remember The Dark Knight being, first and foremost on a lot of people's minds. But I was super amped to see this film since it had been 6 years since the show went off to the air. And I remember I was in the theater and I was like, man, there's not a lot of people here. And I look down and I see my ex-girlfriend from high school was also in the theater. And her and I bonded on X-Files, and she was there with her current boyfriend, and I was there with my buddy. And I immediately was like, Okay, so the one of the only other X-Files fans I know is here.
Mm-hmm.
She's with her new boyfriend. That's great. Um, I'm here with my friend Drew, which is also fine. Um, and so I remember going into the movie with that on my mind, and it was, this is a pretty polarizing film, I think, within the fan community. I think it's more polarizing maybe for people who actually were X-Files at the time that it came out and had waited for over half a decade for the next chapter and were sort of presented this kind of oddball story for this for a film event, which felt a lot like a television episode as opposed to Fight the Future. So I do remember having feelings like that on the day, but I also remember enjoying it a lot and being really happy to revisit the characters and see where they had gone and you know and just getting to experiencing it that close to my ex-girlfriend while she was on a date was really special for all of us.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's sort of in a nutshell what I recall.
Yeah.
And honestly, Sarah, I bought the Blu-ray when it came out later that year, which had a slightly extended director's cut, which I think just features a couple minutes of mostly more gore. I think that the cuts were made because of the rating system to try to keep it PG-13. And I don't know that I've revisited the film since then, since this. So it was really
Did you
really fun
watch
to go back.
it the whole way through, or did you just watch these minutes?
I watched it the whole way through.
Yeah.
And then I went back and rewatched the 5 minutes that I'm going to be covering with the podcast. So yeah, I've I don't have a lot of spare time these days, but I was like, I really need to, because it's been like 15 years. I was like, I need to watch this whole film or it's going to be completely out of context. I'm glad that I did.
Yeah. So from then to now, since you haven't really revisited it, have your feelings about it changed at all? And if so, what are your thoughts?
I think that it's interesting watching this film after the revival, and thinking about the direction that the franchise seemed to be going in back in 2008, and then where it's sort of ended up now here in the 2020s. And I think that it's it's hard to not feel different about the film when so much time has passed and that we've had more episodes. But from a personal level, I think the things that I liked, I still like, and the things that I thought were a little hinky are still pretty hinky in it.
That's fair. Yeah.
But what I do appreciate about the film, and I'm not sure if I appreciated it as much back then, is there's a lot of wonderful character work happening in the movie with our leads. And I appreciate the kind of vibe that the movie goes for. And, it's almost more akin to a Silence of the Lambs kind of, thriller, in which is maybe fitting because, the character of Scully doesn't really come to pass without, the precursor of Clarice and in the Silence of the Lambs film.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like overall I feel generally the same way that I did back in the summer of 2008, but you get older and when you're not as I don't know, when there's not all this pressure on a movie to deliver as a summer blockbuster and you spend like an hour and a half feeling very cold because it's just snow. I feel like your feelings can soften a little bit there.
That's a good point. Because, it does take the pressure off the ending. I think maybe Carl has mentioned this a little bit in previous episodes of this podcast, but with the revival, it takes the pressure off of I Want to Believe just a little bit to where it doesn't have to deliver so much, and it's not the end of the X-Files anymore.
Right. It's not
more now.
The credit shot of them waving at the helicopter
Was,
I
was that a
rewatched it.
satisfying ending to you? If that had been it, we didn't get the revival, and that was the end of
That was
it
the
all.
end.
Would that have been satisfying to you?
No, no, absolutely, of course not. Absolutely. I watched it with my wife this weekend when I rewatched it, and she was a good sport and watched it with me. And she's 7 months pregnant and very uncomfortable right now. And so, but she said she watched it with me, and she she had never seen it all the way through, and she's an X-Files fan, but she's a little younger than I am too, so she didn't see it in the theater. But she remembered watching some of it. She's like, "Yeah, I think I had it on when I was in high school, like right when it came out, and in the background or something." She's like, "I remember it's very cold." I said, "Yeah, you remember in the right one." And that end, I had her watch the credits scene. She was like, "What was that?" I was like, "It's it's not. I don't. It's not for you. It's for the shippers in the audience. I think moments like that, which again, like this really is a film that takes a different approach to the show and the characters than the original series did, because it kind of there's a lot of wish fulfillment in terms of that stuff.
Yeah, gotta give them what you want.
Yeah, for a section of the audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she was a good sport with that. But no, I just there's a tension in this movie if you're I think a longtime X-Files fan, because the series ends on this countdown where it's like there's this impending apocalypse, alien invasion, and we know that it's going to happen on this specific date, and it just doesn't come up in this movie. And so it's like, all right, I'm gonna, like, give in to what is being presented, and just really appreciate the story for what it is. But in terms of like closure, no. I mean, of course not. No way.
I mean, it's the X-Files. Nothing
Right.
ever really dies on the X-Files.
Sure,
Even
right,
the
without a
alien
doubt.
invasion ideas. So what would you rate this film out of 10?
Oh, I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. I I would rate it above a 5. Okay, so we're above average there. Um, I would probably put it somewhere around like a 6 or a 7 is my gut instinct, because I think there's a lot of really good ideas, and there's cool stuff going on, and there's great performances, and there's great moments. Um, I think the film is bogged down a little bit by the stuff I was talking about, being a larger, being part of a larger world and a larger story, I think is tough. And when you can't really address that other stuff, um, in the context of the franchise, I think that it kind of has to take a hit. And that's something I think you know, a lot of franchises that make the transition from television to film have to deal with. And it's like Star Trek, like take Star Trek, for instance, trying to figure out how to take that television formula and transfer it into, an hour and a half, 2 hour event. And, you have Fight the Future, which went kind of full throttle. And then you have this, which is sort of a different way to do it. And, Star Trek has done that too, where you have, an all out big budget blockbuster picture like First Contact, or your Star Trek the Motion Picture, the first film that had a huge budget. And then you have sort of smaller adventures like Star Trek Insurrection, if you've seen that film, which is kind of akin to I Want to Believe, in that it feels like, oh, this kind of feels like a two-parter episode that could have lived somewhere in the original run. And on its face, that's not necessarily bad, but when you're sitting in a movie theater and you've got your popcorn and you got all your friends there, I think that there might be, when you've got your ex-girlfriend sitting a couple rows ahead of you, you're like, I want to see a real shebang here. I want to see a big show. So yeah, I feel like some of that drags down the rating for me. So let's say maybe 6.5 out of 10. If
I think that works.
That's unfair, I'm sorry.
That's totally fair. I think you and it falls pretty much where about everybody else has fallen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm in good company.
I think most people are between like a 6 and a like 7, 8. range.
Okay.
Mostly.
So I'm not being overly negative or overly positive.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel good about that. Is that where your rating would be?
Yeah, mine was, I think I was like a 7.5.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You're being a little more charitable than I am.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm a shipper, so.
Well, I mean, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk about our minute. So,
okay.
We'll just dive right in, shall we?
Got it.
This minute starts at the edge of a scene. So we've got a couple that overlap just a little bit. So
the surgery
we've
scene.
got the surgery scene, and I know they probably talked about this in the previous minute, but I just love the music in this whole. It's beautiful. Yeah. So we just get the tail end of the music in this minute.
Right.
So we go from Scully doing this procedure, and it's a big deal, you know.
Yeah.
And then she goes into the locker room, and she's making notes and trying to process everything that just happened. And Mulder comes in, and this is where kind of the main bulk of the scene starts.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me your thoughts.
Well, I can't, I can't continue without like the elephant in the room here for me, I guess. Like there are things in this film that I think work incredibly well. And then there are things in this film that I think are real head scratchers. Okay. And this entire surgery thing for me, I remember back in 2008 sitting in the theater being like, wait, okay. So she Googles stem cell research. She prints out a bunch of stuff. And then that morning, she performs surgery, an experimental surgery on a child based on a Google search. All right, we just gotta, just go on the ride. So that, I mean, always felt a little hinky to me.
Yeah, that's fair. Did you get that impression? I felt like she was Googling the things and compiling the information together to make a presentation for her case to convince them to let her do it.
Absolutely. We don't see any sort of presentation of information. But I think my biggest issue with it is the timeline, that all of that happens over the course of less than a day. And because, I feel like you've got these two, and this minute really sort of encapsulates this, that you've got these two overarching stories in this film, which are certainly supposed to supplement each other when it comes to the thematic nature of the script. But when it comes to the timelines of them, they're kind of working in conflict with each other, because the kidnapping, you could call the A plot or whatever. The kidnapping is all about speed. It's like, we have to find this woman, so many hours have passed. Every hour that passes makes it less likely that she's found alive. But then, this other plot is one that, in the real world would be one that would involve a lot of time, effort, and research. You can't really just, if you want to do any sort of procedure involving stem cells, you can't just overnight FedEx stem cells. If Scully wanted to do this, she's going to be doing copious amounts of research. She's going to be working with doctors who are specialists. And as far as we know, Dana Scully is not a surgical, cranial stem cell specialist. And of course, a lot of in the real world, surgeries like this, they have to do with trials, like drug trials, and you would apply for, the trial, and there would be a waiting period, and there would be a lot of paperwork, but you can't do all that in the context of Fox Mulder is trying to find a missing FBI agent. And so I feel like the Scully surgery plot has to, kind of lose some of its credibility in order to keep up with the timeline of the film, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes total sense. Yeah, I get that. It's a stretch, but yeah. And I think it's really interesting that they had to write this very quickly before the writer's strike kicked in, because they couldn't change anything once they started filming. And so I wonder how much of that they might have altered as they were going along, and if they may have added in something or rearranged some scenes, you know, something like that they might have been able to put in if they had been able to. There's no telling.
Right.
You know, they kind of just got stuck with what they had and had to make it work.
Right. And I feel it does feel like it's interesting you bring up the writer's strike, and since we've just gone through another writer's strike this past year, a lot of shows were sort of trying to wrap up production on, you know, the part of the season that they were shooting with scripts that had not necessarily been finalized, with not having writers on set, which is a really great advantage for a production to have. It's so ironic that this film was in like development hell for years, and then as soon as it gets greenlit, it's like, okay, now we've got to race to get it done. I really don't like trying to rewrite a movie, but you know, but thinking about that inherent issue in terms of the timelines, I wonder if the Scully plot might have benefited from more of a, like, I don't know, like, let's start the story in the middle take, whereas this could be, when the action starts, this could have been something that was brewing for a while and it's reached its peak. The family's having doubts now that the trial surgery is coming up. The administrators are dragging their feet, and it would just give the entire, you know, procedure a little bit more credibility if this was sort of where Scully had been for months and months in her work, you know, preparing for this experimental procedure, as opposed to introducing it on the same day in Scully's life as it is to the audience.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good point. And I want to talk about that more kind of in the next minute, because I think that plays really well into the motivations that she has for this conversation with Mulder and her. So let's talk about that in the next minute. And we will be back next time for that.
Okay. Let's go. Yeah. You know, I know no one can see us, but we're going to change our clothes, so we're wearing different clothes, so it feels like a different episode, right? Even though this is only audio.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Yep. Just put on a different hoodie.
Okay, perfect.
Make it work.
Just turn this inside out.
All right, so we'll be back to cover minute 52. But until then, always remember, trust no one.